when you sit down and watch the birds, you can always count on them to be there and watch their behaviors, and they always put a smile on your face.
Hello again, and welcome back to another episode of Wisconsin's Outdoor Explorer podcast. I am your host, Jason. One of the easiest things to do to get outdoors in Wisconsin is going bird watching. And that could be walking in the woods looking for birds. It could be just sitting in your own backyard and watching the birds. It's an easy way to get outside. And Wisconsin is filled with so many different types of birds. And as the seasons change, so does the bird population. I know that one of the first signs of spring is seeing my favorite bird, the red-winged blackbird. When they arrive in my yard, I know that spring is right around the corner. But what about all the other birds that either winter here or come down from the northern parts of North America? How can we help them, and should we help them get through the long Wisconsin winter? This week, I'm talking with Lori Schubring, the owner of Wild Birds Unlimited in Wausau, about our winter birds, as well as the growing hobby of backyard birding. If you've wondered ever what it takes to get started to care for your neighborhood flock, you're going to want to stick around and hear what Lori has to say. She's a wealth of information when it comes to birds. She truly loves the hobby of birding and backyard birding, and I think you're going to learn a lot from this podcast. I know I did, and I think if you're not feeding birds already, you're going to want to start. So let's get right into it with my interview with Lori. Well, Lori, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, Lori, what is your earliest memory of being outdoors?
Oh, my gosh. My earliest memory, now keep in mind, I'm pretty close to 60. So when I was probably 3, we lived on a farm in Hartford, Wisconsin. My dad rented it from a gentleman he knew. And I remember the pond flooding out into the field, and we would run through it in our swimming suits and bare feet. Something I would not do now. That introduced me to the outdoors and how much fun it was.
I'm sure you were covered in head-to-toe mud with that kind of flooding, too.
Yes, I sure was. It was gross.
Well, it's winter, and we're talking birds today, and I think a big question that I had, one of the first ones, is kind of what's the current population of the birds here in the state? What type of birds are most people seeing, and what's out there?
Well, unfortunately, it's one of those years where bird populations are down for most people. There are different species of finch that erupt or come down from Canada in winter, but those come down in years where there's not enough food up there to support them, so they come down here where there's easier access to food. Well, the pinecone population up in Canada exploded, and actually it exploded here. If you look at your evergreens, they're full of pine cones. So those seeds are what feeds the birds and even the squirrels. So they didn't find it necessary to come down here. So birds like pine siskins, common redpolls, pine grosbeaks, or red-winged crossbills, they didn't come down here this year, so everybody's kind of complaining about the lack of birds.
So have we seen any different birds this year than we have any other years?
No, there really hasn't been reports of anything different or weird. I will say that we have more snowy owls being reported this year than we did last year. And a good place to go see them is the Buena Vista grasslands. And you're going to want to watch for, obviously, white on a post. They like to sit up high so they can watch the rodents down below. If there are piles in farmers' yards, like manure, for example, sometimes they'll sit on those. And you also want to watch for the short-eared owls and rough-legged hawks. For some odd reason, those guys like it there, too, in the winter.
Okay.
And, of course, you can also see some juncos, some tree sparrows down there as well. Snow buntings.
So why do you think there's more snowy owls? Is it just more people are counting, or do you think there's a reason why we're seeing more this year?
Well, the snowy owl population, when they come down or erupt from the Arctic, the only reason they come down here is because the lemming population isn't enough to support all of them. Basically, for the most part, these birds are young birds. that the adults kicked out of the territory. So they're forced out, so they have to come down here to try to hunt for themselves. You know, if people are going to go out and look for these guys, try to keep your distance because they are guests here and they need all of our respect and distance. So try not to get too close. And if you really do want a close-up shot, use your equipment like your camera or a scope if you have one to try to get a good shot.
So how long will that population be around before they go back?
You know, it's funny, but generally speaking, they're out of here by March, April. But in years past, we've actually had one or two that have hung around into the summer, which is always scary because it just gets too hot for them. They're not built to handle the heat.
Sure. So you got probably about a month and a half maybe to get out there and see a snowy owl if you get a chance.
Absolutely. We're
having kind of a typical, I would say, Wisconsin winter. We have some cold days, we have some snowy days, and we get these, like we've got another really cold day coming up, and then it warms up, and then we get snow again. What kind of challenges does that pose for the birds in our area?
Well, it definitely covers up all of the weed seeds that may be on the grasses and things out there. So they depend on us and our feeders a little bit more than usual. Thankfully, we don't really have too much of a hard crust for the most part this year, so birds like the ruffed grouse will be able to survive this because their way of keeping warm in the wintertime is they actually dive down into the snow. And if there's a hard crust, well, you know, that's like kind of hitting a concrete block and they can't get down in there. So I'm kind of glad that we don't have the hard crust this year. And for the owls even, for them to find rodents, they can find them, but when that snow starts getting really deep like this, it's a little tougher for them. So you'll probably see them perched near roadways and things because it's a little easier for them to get the little rodents as they're running out into the road.
What can I do, to help the birds get through these tougher winter days?
You know, and you don't have to officially have a quote-unquote bird feeder. If you want to do something to support them, shovel out a little area in your yard, or, you know, you can even use your sidewalk and spread some food out there. And the best types of things you can offer are black oil sunflower seeds, shelled peanuts. You know, don't buy the jars from the store. Go to a store like mine or a feed mill and get your peanuts from them because they'll be a little bit cheaper. Striped sunflower seeds, sunflower chips. Just spread that out there, and believe you me, they'll find it and they'll come partake of your little bounty that you've put out there. You can even offer some dried mealworms or even some raisins, chunks of suet. So it's actually really easy. You don't have to do anything, you know, real fancy or expensive.
Now, is it a good idea to help them through the winter, but then as spring comes and the ground starts to show up again, is it better to cut back and let them kind of forage for themselves a little bit?
No, there's actually some studies have been done, and when they have us supplementing their food and they don't have to go quite so far to find it, they actually have a better survival rate and their feathers are in better condition, and their the babies end up surviving a lot better. They have a better survival rate. So continue feeding through the summer. Don't stop. And for me, it's also a selfish reason because we have birds that come here for the summer that are not here in the winter, and they're in their finest apparel because they have to look gorgeous for breeding season. So they're just beautiful at that time of year. So you get to see some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. So basically, by feeding them, we're helping kind of sustain and maybe even increase that population a little bit then.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Is a bird bath a good idea for the wintertime?
Absolutely. Bird baths are a great idea. Now, you'll have folks saying, well, you know, the river's open. Well, believe it or not, the river isn't always open. It opens and closes all winter long. So their water sources are slim to none. It takes them 10% extra energy to melt snow. Yes, they will eat snow. But if we can help them by providing water, why not do so? And most heated bird baths, you're not going to really notice much on your heating bill. Every month it's going to be maybe $3 or something like that, and that's it. They have a thermostat that's built in, so it'll shut it off when it doesn't need to run. And the birds will sit on the edge, and if it's warm enough outside, like 30 or above, you're going to see them out there taking their baths. They need to keep those wings and feathers clean so that they can fly.
And there's no worry that it's going to freeze to their wings or anything like that? They're pretty hardy when it comes to that, aren't they?
They are very hardy when it comes to that. The only thing you really need to worry about is you can't take like a bucket, for example, and put it out there because birds can and do drown. So if you have something really deep, you're going to want to put like maybe a little terracotta tray in there upside down so you create a little island that they can stand on.
This is all kind of part of what I like to call backyard birding. Tell everybody a little bit about really what backyard birding is.
Backyard birding is enjoying the birds that are basically right in your own backyard. For example, if someone is looking for, let's use a horned lark, for example. That's a bird you're probably not going to see in your yard because they're out in the fields and things. And, oh, by the way, they've been sighted, so they're starting to migrate back already. So that would not be considered a backyard bird, for example. But you have tons of birds that would be considered a backyard bird, something that you would see in your yard. So you could see robins, cedar waxwings, and chickadees, and blue jays. There are tons of different birds. You can see hummingbirds, orioles when they come back, scads of warblers that we have in Wisconsin. So those are all considered backyard birds that you would see in your backyard.
So have you seen backyard birding grown in the last few years?
Yes, it actually has. Exponentially. It's actually the biggest hobby. If you would take basketball and baseball and football and combine all of those fans, we actually have more people that feed the birds than all those sports combined.
Wow. Why do you think that is?
You know, it's a hobby that is, when you're at work, you're all stressed out. When you come home, you grab your beverage and you sit down and watch the birds. You can always count on them to be there and watch their behaviors, and they always put a smile on your face. It immediately relaxes you.
So give us some tips about backyard birding. Give us some do's and don'ts that people can, if they've never done it before, some things that can get them started.
I would definitely recommend going to a store where you have some people that can help you choose a feeder. There are a lot of feeders that don't work very well out there, and there's that little critter called a squirrel that can really wreak havoc and discourage you. If you have a feeder out there and suddenly the squirrels are in it all the time, and you're like, you know what, I'm not even going to bother because the squirrels are going to be in it all the time anyway. So try to see an expert, and they can set you up with a feeder that's going to work for what you want it, and then make sure you use a high-quality food. So if you ever see an advertisement that's saying, hey, we've got wild bird food on sale, $10 for an 80-pound bag, and I'm just pulling that off of my head, don't go for the cheapest because that's not always the best.
Sure.
They use a lot of fillers in those inferior foods, so you're going to want one that the birds are going to actually eat all the food and not throw it all on the ground. You want to make sure that you have some cover out in your yard. Birds are predated a lot by other birds, for example, by fox, by all kinds of different critters out there. So if you have some cover out in your yard, and by that I mean evergreens, lilac bushes, serviceberry bushes, things that the birds can scoot off into and feel protected, that definitely helps. And of course, a water source is great too.
So when it comes to feeding birds, is there like a one size that fits all?
As far as feeders?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? There are tons and tons of different types of feeders. Some of them are incredibly hard to clean. So you're going to want to find something that it's not going to be a source of irritation for you to clean, because you want to keep that clean. You don't want to offer a dirty dinner plate to a bird. You certainly wouldn't want to eat off of one. So make sure their feeders are easy to clean, preferably made of something really strong that you're not going to be throwing into the landfill 2 months later. So you want one that's going to be sturdy and that's going to stand up to the weather and not crack in the winter, because let's face it, we have some pretty cold winters here sometimes. And squirrel resistant or proof would be best.
Let's talk about what kind of birds you want to attract when you do start. Is there certain foods that'll bring in certain birds, or again, same with feeders, is there a one size fits all, or is there something different for each bird?
Well, my philosophy is bigger variety of food will get you a bigger variety of birds, okay? So if you can find a blend of food that has things in it like black oil sunflower seed, sunflower chips, safflower, striped sunflower seed, maybe some peanuts thrown in there, or some fruit. If you can find something like that, that is a great start. Just make sure that the pieces aren't too big, that they'll flow out of your feeder decent, because you don't want to be out there banging on your feeder to get the food to come down. You want it to flow down naturally. That's the best way to start, and you'll get a big variety of birds that way. And make sure it's got a nice big surface for a bird like a cardinal to sit on. They like their personal space, so they don't like to sit on little perches. So if you can use a tray feeder or one that has a tray on the bottom of it, that's probably the perfect feeder to get. And usually the first bird to show up is our awesome little chickadees, because they're very curious.
That's good. I was just going to ask you, what kind of bird do you think will be the first ones that you will see at your feeder?
Yeah, 9 times out of 10, it's our friendly little chickadees, and that's why everybody loves them, because they love to check out new food. Ooh, what are they putting out for me now?
I want to ask, because if you haven't fed any birds now at all, if I put a feeder out there, will birds come to that feeder, or is it kind of too late for me and I should probably wait till spring?
It's never too late. Birds hunt by sight, and yes, they kind of have their territory set where they hunt, and they hunt by sight, but they continuously check new areas for food. So it may be a week or two before you finally start to get some activity, and then they start telling their friends. And actually, they communicate with the squirrels, and then everybody starts telling each other that there's food out there. So it could be a couple of weeks before you get activity, but honestly, it could be even longer than that. So we tell people to have patience. And just about when you're about to run out of patience and say, you know what, this was dumb, that's when they start coming in.
Well, let's talk about some of those birds that are going to tell us that spring is here. Now, I saw a recent picture on Facebook that somebody posted a robin has already been spotted in Wisconsin. Are they coming back already? Are we going to have early spring?
Yeah, you know what? Robins are not a good way to tell if we're going to have an early spring or not, because as you recall, probably the last 2 years, they came back here and we got, 30 inches of snow anyway. Robins do come back on their own. They have their own internal clock that tells them when to come, and it's usually the males that come back first because they want to establish their territories. Sometimes it's to the detriment of their survival because there's not a lot of food available, of course, at this time of year. We do have a few robins that overwinter in Wisconsin, but not a lot of them. Now, the next bird you want to watch for besides the robin is the red-winged blackbird. Now, I know people go, oh, I just don't like the red-wings, but honestly, I love the red-wings because that means spring is coming.
Me too. They're my favorite.
Yes, and they're beautiful.
Yeah, I just love them. They got that nice sound that they have, and as soon as you hear that first one, warmer days are ahead. And
besides watching for them, a couple of other things that tell you spring is coming is the chickadees start singing their territorial song, which is, you probably have heard it but didn't really know what it was. Cheeseburger.
Okay, yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, so they started doing that already, and the cardinals, I've had a few people tell me the cardinals are starting to sing already.
Okay.
So if you're one of those lucky people that has a flock of 5 or 6 cardinals, or sometimes even 20 of them in your yard, you better be aware that pretty soon they're going to split up because they'll tolerate each other in the wintertime, but as soon as breeding season starts, they won't tolerate each other anymore. Then you won't see that big flock anymore.
Sounds like things are starting to get ready here, that there's starting to be little signs of spring ahead, and that's a good thing. So we got to watch for them red-winged blackbirds, and that'll be the real truth to when spring is actually going to be here, I think.
Absolutely. And if we do, for some odd reason, have another spring like we did the last 2, where, it starts to melt, but then we get a big dump of snow and the birds are here anyway, that's probably the most common question. We have people flocking to the store. Notice how I say that pun, flocking to the store. And they want to know, what can I feed the robins? Well, if you want to help your robins out, raisins are great. Chunk up some suet and throw that out there, and it doesn't have to be on something formal. It can be on your sidewalk like we had talked about before. Dried mealworms are awesome. Suet pellets, if you have a bag of those at home. Even sunflower chips are a great item to keep around if something like that happens, because robins will eat sunflower chips if the food is not available.
So is there anything that you shouldn't throw out to the birds? I think a lot of people think bread and things like that. They'll eat that. Is there, give a list of some things you should not put out there for the birds to eat.
You know what? That's a great question, and I'm so glad that you asked that, because a lot of people are trying to help the birds. They figure, you know what, I can't eat this bread myself, or it's starting to get hard. I'm going to throw it out for them. Yes, your birds are going to eat it, but unfortunately it fills them up so they feel like they're full, but they get absolutely no nutrition from it. Now, birds like geese and ducks, you may think you're doing them a favor, but they actually can get a condition called angel wing, where their wings don't grow correctly and they can never fly. So if you want to feed those guys, like the ducks and geese, cracked corn is awesome, but in my book, generally speaking, people food like cereal, popcorn, those kinds of things, I would stay away from that. It's usually got chemicals on it anyway that you really don't want them to have. So stick with the bird food and the dried fruit.
Good. I'm glad we got that, because I think that's important, because I think a lot of people just think, well, the birds will eat it. I'll just throw it out my backyard and let them take care of it. And so that's good. It's important to give them the good nutrition. So like you said earlier, so that they, have their bright feathers and they increase their population. So it's important that they get good nutrition, just like us. We got to have that good nutrition in ourselves, and they do too. So where can somebody come to learn more about backyard birding?
They can email us at the store, and I'm the one that gets the emails. So they can email me at wbuwausau@gmail.com. They can give us a call at 715-298-3140. And any of us would be more than happy to answer your questions, or just stop in the store, because that's our favorite topic.
Perfect. Thank you, Lori. And again, thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing a little bit of your knowledge on birds and backyard birding. And I can't wait to see them first red-winged blackbirds of the year.
I'm excited. It won't be long. Thanks, Jason.
I want to thank Lori for taking some time to talk about birds and backyard birding with us today. I'll put her ways to contact her in the show notes. I'll put their web address up too. So if you have any questions about birds, please reach out to her. She's very passionate and knowledgeable about birds, and she is more than willing to help answer any questions. No question is too big or too small. Just reach out to her. She is a wealth of information. Backyard birding is an easy way for you to get out and enjoy the outdoors. Taking care of our local birds is as important as it is rewarding for a healthy population. She talked about how feeding birds really helps them in increasing their numbers and population. Getting them through these harsh winters that we can have sometimes is a real benefit to them. What I like about it is it gets you outside. You got to keep those feeders full for those birds once you start, because they start to count on you a little bit for that food. So once you start, get out there and enjoy them, feed them, talk to them, do whatever you have to do to enjoy this hobby. And honestly, what's better on a cold day than sitting in your warm home watching your feathered friends enjoy their day at your feeder? So keep those feeders full as you head out to be one of Wisconsin's outdoor explorers. Thanks again for joining me. I'm your host, Jason, and I'll talk to you again next week. Thanks for listening to the Wisconsin's Outdoor Explorer podcast. For more great information about being an outdoor explorer, visit our website at wisconsinsoutdoorexplorer.com. Be sure to check out the blog page and follow us on social media. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.